Assalamu alaikum, Shiri Mazari. How are you?
Walaikum salam. I'm good, thank you.
So, Shiri is Federal Minister for Human Rights, and this is her area of interest and expertise also as far as the national security and foreign policy is concerned. We especially engage these two women leaders, though these two are very active members of Corporate Pakistan Group as well, interacting with our members, and we decided to engage them for the inaugural. And this will be followed by several panel discussions and conversations. So, Shiri, over to you for your 15 minutes opening thought, and then this will be followed by question answers with you.
Thank you as well, and I want to thank, of course, the Nutshell Group and the corporate group for giving this opportunity and to sort of point out that I'm Shireen and not Sherry. Everybody tends to mix that up. Anyhow, Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. I want to basically focus on Pakistan because, everybody's talking about how there's been this shock with which everything collapsed in Afghanistan. In the US, there is discussion and debate on the role of the present administration in this sudden collapse. In the UK also, we're seeing that. But what is emerging and what for Pakistan should now be unacceptable is the scapegoating, that the murmurs of scapegoating are coming, whether it's the Western media, whether it's in the US or the UK, in their Congress, in their parliament. The scapegoating of Pakistan for a failure that entirely rests with those who occupied Afghanistan for 20 years should be something that Pakistan is not going to be prepared to accept anymore, because Pakistan itself has been the victim of these wars that were done. First, when the Soviets came into Afghanistan and Pakistan was brought in, and we trained Mujahideen with the help of the CIA, so to fight what we were told were foreign invaders, and we were seen as collaborators, therefore, and we suffered the wrath of that. We had armed Taliban groups rising in Pakistan. We had terrorism coming in, militant terrorism coming in, polarization of our society, the drugs and Kalashnikov culture, as many people called it. And of course, we also have been, and then we had, of course, 9/11. And again, we were brought into a war that our Prime Minister has consistently stated for decades was not our war. And he has consistently stated that there would never be a military solution to a peace in Afghanistan, and that's exactly how things have followed. And when he advised the Americans earlier to have a dialogue when they had more strength, when the date of withdrawal had been given, nobody listened. And at the end of the day, the US did dialogue with the Taliban. The US had a Doha agreement with the Taliban. And of course, that was done from a weakened position. And then, of course, they put pressure on us to release the Taliban leadership. Mullah Baradar was released on the US's pressure and insistence as part of the deal that they were doing with the Taliban. And what happened, frankly, at the end of the day, I think there wouldn't have been any other outcome, even if the US had stayed on for another 6 months. Once you had the agreement, and once you found that you really didn't do any state structure building, you didn't do any nation building. A lot of money was supposedly going into the Afghan National Army, but at the end of the day, where did the money go? What happened? Where was the training of this ANA, which just collapsed? They were not prepared to fight. And Ghani's flight out of Afghanistan, with or without the cash that people say he took, but the fact that he fled and the ANA collapsed because they were not prepared to fight and give up their lives for what they saw as a corrupt government, the Ghani government, then you knew. If you understand these events of why the ANA collapsed and Ghani's flight, you will understand why the Taliban came in and marched in so quickly, which nobody was anticipating. I don't want to go into details, but I do want to draw a similar analogy to what happened in Cuba, where the Americans were supporting a corrupt Batista government. And when Castro's and his revolutionaries started marching in, they hardly fought any big battles because the Cuban army collapsed, the Cuban state structure collapsed, and Batista fled out of Havana, and the revolutionaries marched in on the 1st of January 1959. Castro himself was fighting 500 kilometers away, not realizing the collapse would come. So there is this similarity of, when you're putting your money and not even assessing where it's going, how it's being spent, and if it's only bolstering up a corrupt government where there's no infrastructure development at all, where the military may be getting arms and so on, but where is the military sense of camaraderie or the sense of institutional commitment? You don't do any of that, and you think just pouring in money will resolve the issue. I'm afraid that's not what happened, and that is where the answer lies. And if now all the failures on other people's part is going to be put and Pakistan is going to be scapegoated, this is not going to be acceptable at all. Because and by the way, Pakistan is a country that has been abandoned periodically by the US. The only interest the US has ever had in Pakistan is when it has other regional interests in our area. And then we're abandoned. And then every time Bush said, we will not abandon Pakistan this time. And lo and behold, what happened at the end of the day? We were sanctioned after helping and supporting the Americans. So we have had enough of blame games. We have had enough of scapegoating. And I also want to point out just a factual thing, that there was no Pakistani involved in 9/11 attacks at all. And yet we suffered. As I said, we became looked at as collaborators, and nobody should underestimate the power of Pashtun nationalism. And once it's mixed with the jihadi spirit, it becomes indomitable. I mean, nobody should underestimate Pashtun nationalism. And unfortunately, for 20 years, this was never understood by NATO and by the US. And Pakistan not only went into a war which was not its war, it lost 70,000 people. Its economy was destroyed. There was more polarization. More refugees came in. We had the Afghan refugees coming in at the time of the Soviet invasion. We had refugees coming in after 9/11, and very little international support for those refugees. And the worst of it was that at then tribal areas, now they're part of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but being destabilized, especially because of drone attacks. Hundreds of drone attacks on Pakistan by a country that was supposed to be our ally. After all, the US had not declared war on Pakistan, and yet it was raining bombs through drones on Pakistani soil and territory. So this is something that Pakistan has suffered, as the Prime Minister keeps pointing out, and we believe this strongly, that we have been victims of these wars that are being fought. After Afghanistan, Pakistan is the country that has suffered the most because of these military occupations and military invasions, or whatever, however well you like to see them, whether it was the Soviet Union or whether it was US NATO. So there is, and now what are we seeing? I think the Taliban, let's be fair, the Taliban today in their statements and in their actions so far are very different from the Taliban that were there earlier, ruling Afghanistan. For one, they have categorically stated that they want an inclusive government. Will they live up to it? Give them a chance. We've had the Northern Alliance in Pakistan, their leadership, what was the Northern Alliance, they've been interacting with Pakistan leadership, and we are trying our best to hope and hoping that there will be an inclusive leadership. But the Pakistani position is clear. We will accept whatever the Afghan people decide. We are not there to impose anything on the Afghan people. All the old conceptualizations that Pakistan was accused of, they don't hold anymore. As Sherry Rahman pointed out, this is the third government that has made it clear that we want an inclusive government, that we want what the Afghans want, and that we are not going to impose, neither do we have the power to impose, and that there is no military solution, and there never was a military solution. So look at the money and the lives wasted, the lives lost in trying to achieve something which was not achievable, a military solution for peace in Afghanistan. That just cannot happen. And Pakistan is also, and no bloodshed has been shed as such with the Afghans coming into Kabul. And what has been very encouraging is a very clear-cut statement by the Taliban that they will not allow their territory to be used against any country, and that there is no place for an armed TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, in Afghanistan, because that has been one of our major problems with the previous Afghan government, where India was given a lot of space to fund TTP and other terrorists targeting Pakistan from Afghan soil. So, in Pakistan, from a Pakistani perspective, one of the major positives to come out is the fact that the Taliban are going to put an end to it. We will wait to see whether they live up to it, to the TTP militarization, and to other terrorist groups. The Chinese have a problem with the ETIM, East Turkmenistan group, terrorist group. And that will be of great comfort to the Chinese also, because one of the major problems that our countries surrounding Afghanistan face is terrorism coming from Afghan soil. So the fact that the Taliban have said they will not be, they will not allow their territory to be used by these terrorist groups against the neighbors or by any country is a very welcome position for us. And of course, equally important and very comforting, although we have to see how it's operationalized, is their commitment that they will not place restrictions on women and girls and minorities. We saw during Muharram, the majalis and processions taking place, which was welcome after the initial problem in Kabul, where they took down some Shia flags, religious banners, but then there were the Jalus, as it's called, or the processions and the majalis were allowed, and they took place, and there were large numbers there of Shias who went and participated. So that initial move was, this has been a positive development. Girls are going to school. They've been asked to cover their heads, not wear hijab or any full hijab or anything. I don't know. The point is, if it does not impede women working and girls going to school, then there are countries in Europe that don't allow Muslim women to dress as they want. In fact, they cannot go to school, they can't work in public places, and they can even be arrested. So there is that law which some of us have protested about, but that is the law of that country. And maybe not more than one European country. I don't want to get into name calling here, but there are laws restricting or suggesting dress codes for women in so many parts of the world. I personally feel it's not a good thing. But if the Taliban, if they form an all-inclusive government, and if by consensus they decide to have this, and if they do not impede women's participation in public life, they do not impede women schooling, then we'll have to see. And I think this is also a positive sign. And so far, schools have opened again. We're seeing women anchors and women coming, and newscasters coming on at least one of one television station that one has seen. So these are positive early signs. And for Pakistan, what is critical is that stability is arrived at sooner rather than later, because we need that stability now in this region. It has been destabilized for far too long, and this destabilization has impacted negatively on Pakistan. And as I said, we have been one of the victims in this. So, in that sense, we are waiting and watching. We are hoping there'll be an inclusive government in Afghanistan. And what I do feel I need to point out again is that trying to squeeze the Taliban by withholding their funds, which the World Bank has done, or by freezing their assets in the US, which the American government has declared, and by Canada declaring that they will never recognize, that they will not recognize the Taliban government, without giving the Taliban a chance to actually form the government. And this seems rather bizarre. On the one hand, you have the US signing an agreement with the Taliban. So they were legitimized by the international community through this agreement. All the NATO countries agreed to this. So all those countries, including Canada, which is a member of NATO, recognized and accepted the Taliban, and they signed an agreement with them. So on the one hand, you do that, and then on the other hand, you say, oh no, we can't accept the Taliban and we're going to freeze their funds. You are squeezing them and pushing them in a direction that you really don't want to push them in, and which none of us want to see happen. Because we want inclusivity, we want the Taliban to be mainstream, to reach out. But if you're going to corner them and hem them in right from the start, then I think that a lot of problems are going to arise. So we need to be very careful on how we handle. And I think Pakistan has made clear that it will work for a consensus with other neighbors. And there is the trilateral meeting, plus the 3+1 meeting is about to take place. Our foreign minister, as I speak, is traveling to the Central Asian states. So we believe that there should be a consensus, including on recognition. We believe that there should be that the Taliban should be encouraged to live up to their commitments that they have made about inclusivity, about protecting the human rights of minorities, women, girls. We need to encourage them to live up to the statement they've made about not allowing their territory to be used for against any other country. So we should encourage them to move in that direction, to show by their actions what they have said in their statements. And as Sherry also pointed out, one thing is certain: the regional dynamics and the security dynamics have altered tremendously. And for me, I think in a good way from Pakistan's perspective, because it undermines the sort of strange military strategic alliance of the Quad with the US and with India, trying to sort of hegemonize this region under their power politics. I think this leaves more space for the development of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a remarkable initiative of the Chinese, where they're actually helping infrastructure development across the region and beyond, even in Africa. So I think that over the coming years, we will see a shift in the strategic dynamics, where the military-centric approach of the US and India will not be the dominant strategic factor, and the regional states will focus more on geoeconomics, on development, and will not be impeded by occupations and by, as I said, the military strategic unidimensional approach that unfortunately the US and its NATO allies adopted. And again, I just want to conclude by saying that for Pakistan has to be the first priority. We have been victims of what has been happening in this region for far too long, and we are not going to let ourselves be scapegoated, because enough is enough. We will look after our own national interests, and that is how our Afghan policy will be defined. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shiri Mazari. My first question to you is that will Pakistan be among the first to recognize the Taliban government, provided the transition of power is negotiated and without significant violence?
I think Pakistan will recognize along with its allies, especially its regional allies. I don't think there will be a unilateral recognition and Pakistan would be alone and the first. That I don't think is going to happen.
Okay. So, will the CPEC and One Belt, One Road project be expanded to include additional major infrastructure in Afghanistan? And will the Chinese increase the scope of their collaboration with the Taliban government? What is your view?
I think if the Taliban deliver on their commitments, especially vis-a-vis terrorism, there's no reason why the Russians and the Chinese will not increase their economic involvement. And of course, for CPEC, that would be tremendous because then you have this whole linkage going into Central Asia, going out of Pakistan into Iran and beyond. So in that sense, the potential of development for all the countries in the Belt and Road Initiative will be tremendous. And I think the Chinese have so far shown that they will look at what the Taliban are doing and be ready to invest in Afghanistan.
Thank you. I want to know your, please summarize the session and I want your closing remarks and your few recommendations for the government of Pakistan. The foreign minister is on the visit of Central Asian countries right now. You are also in interaction with the government and the prime minister. But what are your closing remarks? What are you, for the future of Pakistan?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think that depending on how the political government is formed in Afghanistan, if, as we hope and expect, there'll be an inclusive government, and as we hope that in that case, they will not be squeezed in terms of their assets, Afghanistan assets abroad, and we hope that recognition then will come from the international community. If these things happen as we hope and we expect, because we are seeing the Taliban already talking to have an inclusive government, if there is an inclusive government, that would be the first step towards showing their intent to the rest of the world. So that will be very critical. Equally critical will be how they protect the human rights of women, children, and of course the minorities. And the chaos at Kabul airport, unfortunately, because the US controls the inner perimeter of the airport, was largely due to the fact that everything collapsed with Ghani's departure. And it's very unfortunate how that US plane took off with people dying to their deaths from the air. It was inexplicable how a plane would take off in that situation. But hopefully the US will investigate what happened. But I see that if we look at it positively and we sort of encourage what the Taliban have said so far, and we encourage the Taliban and the other parties to dialogue and form an inclusive government, I think things will improve in Afghanistan. People say, that, oh, this is not liberation. But if getting rid of the Soviets was liberation, twice the Afghans got rid of the British from their territory and said they were liberated. So if they've removed another occupation power, if it's not liberation, what is it? Is my question. So I'm hoping that there will be stability, and I'm hoping that the world will give the Taliban a chance if the Taliban continue to live up to what they've said they intend to do.
One academic question with you, because you are expert on foreign policy and the diplomacy and the national security. How would you analyze the diplomatic strategy of the Taliban and how they have maneuvered in the last 5 years? Because actually this is a classic case study, how they maneuvered. Please answer.
I think that the Taliban had a few advantages. they had time on their side. They are Afghans, they lived there, they were among the people, they had time on their side. And they waited and they watched, I think, the corruption that was going on, and the Afghans were getting disgruntled. And I think at the same time, the fact that they survived the military power of the US and NATO eventually brought them to the dialogue table. And I think that their political relevancy never died out. Had they, in my own view is, and our government's view is, that had they, the US and NATO, and had Ashraf Ghani not been so obstinate, and had they dialogued with the Taliban much earlier, before withdrawal dates were given and so on, I think that there would have been a much easier solution. But at the end of the day, the outcome would have been this, because you can't win peace just through military occupation. You have to have people supporting you locally, and clearly the Taliban had that support, because, like all groups, they lived amongst the people. I mean, people who fight unconventional wars, they don't have military rears. They live amongst the people, and that's what the Taliban were doing. So, like it or not, they had the support of the people, which is why the army collapsed and Ashraf Ghani fled. So I think that you could say they played a good political game, but I think it wasn't a game. I think they did what they did best, and that was cultivate the people around them and bide their time, which they did very cleverly, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Shiri Mazari. And ladies and gentlemen, this was our inaugural session for the Ahwan Conference.